an intimate and profound reflection on why he keeps you close, but never chooses you, and how to transform that pain into strength, freedom, and self-love. Arthur Schopenhauer.
All that is deeply loved becomes a part of us. This quote, attributed to Helen Keller, carries a truth you may know better than you'd like. Because there is someone in your life who doesn't choose you, yet insists on keeping you close. And that ambiguous presence, which should bring clarity, often turns into an invisible burden, heavy, hard to carry. Deep down you know you deserve more than crumbs, but something in you keeps holding on, waiting, believing that somehow this story might still change. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Realizing that your devotion is complete, but his is always partial. He doesn't let you go, but he doesn't truly hold you either. He doesn't push you away, yet he never claims you. It feels like living in an emotional limbo, a space between hope and frustration, where every gesture of affection seems to promise something that never comes true. Have you ever asked yourself why someone would do this? Why he prefers to keep you suspended in this space, never crossing the bridge of decision? The answer lies partly in human nature. Many men, and in truth many people, cannot bear the thought of losing what makes them feel important. Even if they are not willing to commit, they want to keep close the source of attention, affection, and care that feeds their ego. It is cruel, but it is also human. Psychology calls this the anxious avoidant attachment, a pattern in which someone desires closeness but fears true intimacy. Jung would say that projections are at play in this dynamic. He projects onto you the ideal of comfort, but recoils at the responsibility that comfort demands. And you, perhaps without realizing it, project onto him the hope for validation that could only be born within yourself. There is therefore an invisible play of shadows unfolding. You feel the pain of not being chosen, but also the fear of losing even this almost. After all, when he withdraws, you feel such emptiness that you convince yourself it's better to have half than nothing at all. This is the most silent poison, believing that crumbs can satisfy a hunger that is immense. Nietzsche said, "Man is something that must be overcome." In this context, the phrase echoes like a calling. It is not only about understanding his behavior, but about overcoming the role you agreed to play. Because while you wait for a decision that never comes, your life is suspended in time, as if on pause, waiting for a scene that may never be filmed. And here lies the first uncomfortable truth. He doesn't choose you because he doesn't have to. As long as you remain willing to stay in this ambiguous space, he feels no urgency to change. And as hard as it is to admit, part of the key lies in your hands. Not because it's your fault, but because you are the one who has the power to redefine the boundaries of this game. The pain you feel is legitimate. The confusion that torments you is real. But the solution begins when you allow yourself to look beyond his presence and start to see what truly keeps you in this place. The emptiness is his, but isn't the hope that sustains it yours? It's strange how the human heart grows used even to uncertainty. You find yourself waiting for a message, interpreting silences, trying to decode gestures that are never clear. A lingering glance, a kind word, an unexpected invitation. Everything seems like a sign that maybe this time he will choose you. But soon after comes the distance, the calculated coldness, the disappearance that shatters any newly formed hope. This cycle of closeness and withdrawal creates in you a kind of invisible dependence, as if you were living for the sake of a promise that never comes true. Neuroscience explains part of this. The brain releases dopamine whenever we receive small, unexpected doses of affection. It works like an addiction. It doesn't matter if the affection is sporadic, as long as it shows up unpredictably. It produces intense pleasure. This mechanism, called intermittent reinforcement, is the same one that keeps someone hooked on a game of chance or an emotional roulette. You never know when the next reward will come, but you keep investing energy, time, and heart. And deep down, this is the mechanism he uses, consciously or not, to keep you around. He doesn't need to promise anything. All it takes are occasional gestures of attention to reignite your hope. And so, you remain in orbit, revolving around a center that never truly opens its doors to you. But there is something even deeper happening: your own need to be chosen. It is natural to want to be a priority in someone's life, but when that desire turns into a necessity, you hand the other person an immense power. It is as if your identity depends on his decision. Jung spoke about this when describing the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted. Often, you put on the mask of the perfect partner, the understanding woman, the one who knows how to wait, believing that if you play all the roles, one day he will finally realize it and choose you. However, this silent waiting slowly eats away at your authenticity. You distance yourself from your own essence in order to fit into a story that was never written by you. And here is where the deepest pain begins. It is not only his absence that hurts, but the absence of yourself in this process. The Bible in Proverbs 4:23 reminds us, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." This passage speaks not only of faith, but of practical wisdom. Guarding your heart means protecting yourself from situations that drain your energy and steal your peace. When you allow someone to define your worth with crumbs of attention, your heart becomes open ground, vulnerable to every passing wind. The truth is, he doesn't choose you because he hasn't yet faced the consequence of your absence. And you remain because you fear confronting the emptiness that would appear if you stepped back. It is a cruel paradox. He fears commitment, you fear distance. And so you both remain trapped in a dance that never reaches its climax. But within this paradox lies a calling. Perhaps the real question is not, why doesn't he choose me? But, why do I keep accepting not being chosen? That question, as painful as it sounds, opens a new dimension of reflection. Because what you deserve is not to live on the sidelines, waiting, but to discover the strength to place yourself at the center of your own story. And this is where transformation begins to take shape. Slowly, you begin to realize that the question, why doesn't he choose me, may matter less than, why do I keep shrinking myself to fit the space he offers? This shift in perspective is painful, but necessary, because it moves the focus from him to you. And perhaps that is what you've been avoiding, facing your own strength, taking the risk of walking alone, choosing yourself before being chosen by someone else. Schopenhauer said that human desire is an endless source of suffering. We long for what we don't have, and once we achieve it, we quickly desire something else. In this cycle, we live between dissatisfaction and hope, rarely at peace. Perhaps that is why he keeps you close, not because he is incapable of deciding, but because he craves the security of knowing you will be there when loneliness strikes. He doesn't choose you because, for him, it is enough to have the certainty of your presence. But what about you? How long will you accept being a passing harbor instead of a destination? How long will you settle for being a possibility when you were born to be a reality? These questions sting because they touch directly on the wound of self-worth. Acknowledging that you deserve more means, inevitably, facing the emptiness that appears when you step away from what does not fulfill you. Psychology shows that this emptiness is, in fact, fertile ground. It is there that the chance to reinvent yourself is born, to rebuild your identity without depending on validations that never come. Yet, to reach that place, you must first pass through the initial discomfort, the silence that feels crushing when you choose to step back. Silence is not absence, it is a space of revelation. It is there that you finally hear your own voice, the one that has been muffled for so long. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." There is no phrase more liberating, yet more challenging. Becoming who you are requires courage to remove the masks, to face your fears, to embrace solitude as a path of discovery. And perhaps this inconclusive relationship is trying to teach you exactly that. You don't need someone who hesitates in your presence, but someone who recognizes your worth and walks beside you without doubt. The problem is that the mind insists on creating narratives to justify the unjustifiable. He's afraid of getting hurt. Maybe it's not the right time. If I wait a little longer, he will realize. Each of these thoughts works like an anesthetic, delaying the pain but also postponing the cure. And in the end, you remain trapped in the same cycle of waiting. What is needed, then, is a gesture of rupture. Not necessarily a dramatic break, but a silent, firm decision not to accept less than you deserve. This decision is not against him. It is for you. Because when you define your limits, the other is forced to take a position. Either he truly steps closer, or he fades away. Either way, you are no longer left, suspended. There is a hidden strength in this process. The strength of realizing that you don't need to be chosen in order to exist. The strength of understanding that your life does not depend on the validation of someone who cannot see your greatness. The strength of knowing that true love is not made of halves, but of two whole beings who meet. Maybe he will never change. Maybe he will never choose you. But the real turning point comes when you realize you no longer need that choice to keep moving forward. There comes a moment when the pain of waiting turns into clarity. You realize it's no longer about understanding his heart, but about listening to your own. It's as if a fog begins to lift, revealing that all this time you were caught in an unfair game. He held the rope while you balanced at the edges, never knowing whether you would be pulled closer or left to fall into emptiness. But now something shifts. You begin to see that you can simply let go of the rope and keep walking. That is when true freedom is born. When you understand you don't need answers to move on. He may never explain why he didn't choose you, may never admit he was afraid, may never recognize the value he lost. But your life doesn't have to stop there. Your story doesn't end on a blank page left behind by someone who never knew how to write beside you. Jung once said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That darkness is the pain of not being chosen, the emptiness of waiting for something that never came. Yet by facing this shadow, you discover a new kind of light, the awareness that your life is yours, and the power to transform it was never in his hands. It was always in yours. And when that awareness awakens, a different kind of strength rises. You no longer see him as the answer to your fears, but as the reflection of everything you've already decided not to accept. Your gaze shifts. Your heart changes. The weight begins to dissolve. And with it comes a new question. Not why doesn't he choose me, but what do I choose for myself from now on? This turning point doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small actions. Setting a boundary, keeping a silence, giving a response he didn't expect. Little by little, you realize your energy is no longer tied to waiting, but to moving forward. You begin to see yourself as the author of your own story, someone who will no longer settle for crumbs because you recognize the feast you can build within yourself. Spirituality also reminds us that a greater force guides these processes. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3 we read, "To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven." Maybe this unresolved relationship was only a season of learning, a call to know yourself better, to discover that you don't need someone else's choice to validate your worth. That was the season of pain, but now it can be the season of liberation. And here lies the beauty. When you choose yourself, everything around you changes. People who once seemed unreachable lose their power over you. Situations that once hurt you are now seen with compassion. You realize it was never about him. It was always about you. About how willing you were to love yourself enough not to accept less than you deserve. This is the quiet but powerful shift. It isn't revenge. It isn't about proving your worth. It isn't about showing him what he lost. It's about looking in the mirror and finally seeing the woman who was always there, hidden behind the waiting. After moving through the pain, after realizing you don't have to live in uncertainty anymore, the most important question arises. What do you do now? Transformation doesn't stay at the level of awareness. It must show up in concrete choices, in daily actions that reaffirm your value. Because it's not enough to know you deserve more. You must act like someone who does. The first step is to redefine your boundaries. That means no longer accepting what contradicts what you truly want for yourself. Boundaries are not walls that isolate, but bridges that show how far someone is allowed to go in your life. When you clearly state what you will no longer tolerate, you not only protect yourself but also teach others how to treat you. And if he isn't willing to cross that bridge with you, it isn't a loss, it's liberation. The second step is to invest in yourself. For so long, you may have poured all your energy into waiting for signs, interpreting gestures, trying to decode him. Now that same energy can be redirected toward what truly builds your life, your projects, your health, your friendships, your spirituality, your art, your voice. When you strengthen yourself, you stop relying on someone else's gaze to recognize your greatness, and it's exactly at that point that life begins to open in unexpected ways. The third step is to break the cycle of inner silence. For too long, you got used to silencing your own voice, accepting quietly, waiting for him to guess what you felt. But now it's time to speak with clarity, not necessarily to him, but to yourself and to the world. Say what you want, affirm what you feel, share your vision with courage. Because silence is consent, and you no longer consent to living in the shadows. These steps may seem simple, but they require courage. And courage, as Aristotle reminded us, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. You will feel afraid of losing, of regretting, of being alone. But each time you move through that fear, you discover a freedom you never imagined. What once looked like loss becomes space. What once felt like emptiness becomes fertile ground. And along the way, something powerful happens. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing. You choose the people who enter your life, the connections you strengthen, the way you invest your time and energy. And that conscious choice is the true act of self-love. The Bible, in Isaiah 41, verse 10, carries a promise that echoes in this process. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. This is not only a word of faith but of trust. Trust that you are never alone on this path, that a greater force sustains every step, even when everything feels uncertain. And what about him? The truth is, once you start living from this new place, his presence no longer carries the same weight. He may try to return, may try to pull you back into the same old game, but you are no longer the same. Your response changes, your posture changes, and suddenly, what once felt irresistible becomes nothing more than a reminder of who you no longer are. This is the moment when waiting turns into choosing, and silence turns into voice. It is also the moment when your life truly begins to bloom. In the end, it all comes down to one quiet but powerful decision. You no longer need to wait to be chosen. Life doesn't happen in someone else's hesitation, but in your ability to embrace who you are and what you deserve. And that awareness changes everything. You no longer look at him the same way because you no longer seek in him the validation that once seemed vital. Now you know. True love isn't built on uncertainty but on presence. When you look back, you'll see that this season of waiting wasn't only pain, it was also learning. It was the mirror that revealed the wounds you still needed to heal, the fears you needed to face, the courage you needed to awaken. Because if he had chosen you before you learned to choose yourself, you might still be living insecure, dependent, unaware of your own strength. Paradoxically, it was his absence of choice that created space for your own. And that's what makes this moment so special. Now you can consciously choose who enters and who leaves your life. You can choose not to settle for crumbs. You can choose the silence that frees you instead of the waiting that traps you. You can choose the path of authenticity, even if it's harder, because it's on that path that true peace blossoms. 3 practical steps can help you sustain this shift. 1. Reaffirm your worth every day. Write it down. Say it to yourself. Remember, you deserve whole love, not fragments. Every time you feel tempted to go back to waiting, Remind yourself you are no longer who you once were. 2. Fill the emptiness with movement. Invest in projects, friendships, spirituality, self-care. The emptiness of someone's absence only becomes unbearable when it isn't filled with life. The more you move, the less space there is for emotional stagnation. 3. Choose before you are chosen. Don't wait for someone else to define your destiny. Make decisions based on what you want, not on what the other person offers. When you put yourself first, you naturally move away from those who aren't ready to walk beside you. These steps don't mean hardness, but self-love. And that is the kind of love that never fails because it depends on no one. It is the love that heals, that strengthens, that opens the way for true connections. Maybe he will never understand what he lost. Maybe he will never have the courage to admit why he didn't choose you. But that no longer matters. What matters is that now you know you don't need to live according to someone else's choices. Your life is yours. Your story is yours. Your heart is yours. And when you walk with that awareness, everything changes. You no longer live to prove anything to anyone, but to live the fullness of who you are. And in that place, true freedom is born. So hold on to this truth. It isn't a lack of worth that makes someone fail to choose you. It's a lack of clarity in them. And that does not define who you are. What defines you are the choices you make from this moment forward. And maybe, sometime from now, when you look back, you'll smile. Not because he finally understood, but because you finally set yourself free.